Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Sydney University Library for another Quick Bite session. This is on social media and the use of social media. Now, if you have any questions or problems with audio, my colleague Christina is looking after the chat pod, so you can ask your questions there and she will respond to you. And I'm joined today by Dr. Cameron Webb, who's a clinical lecturer, a hospital scientist, and Mozzie wrangler.
Yes,
Yes.
mosquito. I spend my summers wrangling mosquitoes and
Yeah.
sloshing about in the swamps of Sydney.
That sounds really exciting. Where are these swamps of Sydney?
Along the Parramatta River and Georges River, anywhere where you can find mosquitoes, you'll find me during the warmer months trying to kind of catch them and see what role they're playing in increasing the risk of mosquito-borne disease, not just in Sydney, but New South Wales and Australia more generally as well.
Awesome. And so just to get the ball rolling, because you're actually really active on social media, you've got 7,500 followers on Twitter. Tell us what you use social media for.
Yeah, I see it as an extension of my work. So as well as doing research with the University of Sydney, I'm also employed by New South Wales Health Pathology. And part of the work that we do there is essentially trying to keep Australians safe from mosquito-borne disease and mosquito bites every summer. And a critical part of that is community education, raising awareness of safe and effective ways to avoid mosquito bites, things like using insect repellent or avoiding areas where mosquitoes are most active. And in the same way that I would give talks to community groups or do engage with traditional media, I think social media is a platform to embrace so that I can try to extend both public health messages, but also enhance the impact of some of the research myself or my colleagues might be doing into mosquito biology or mosquito-borne disease.
Cool. And so one of the questions that we often get asked by HDR students and researchers who are looking to get into using social media to promote their research is how much time does this take in a typical day?
Yeah, it's one of those things that I don't think about specifically. Over the years, I've integrated it into just the way that I do work. And I take opportunities to engage with social media at different times during the day, depending on what I'm doing. So it might be when I'm in the queue to get a coffee in the morning, or it might be when I'm out in the field collecting mosquitoes. I want to share images of the local wetlands I'm working in, or perhaps the mosquitoes that are biting me. But also when I'm doing my research as well. So I want to give my followers an idea about what it's like being a scientist as much as about mosquito biology or mosquito-borne disease.
Sure.
And even things like at the start of my day, I like to jump online and see what the latest news is about mosquitoes. I might be interested in the latest research that's being covered in the news or news about outbreaks of disease here or overseas. And again, I need to do that for my job, but I also use that as an opportunity to provide content that I can share with my followers as well.
Okay.
And so I think the way that I can get the most out of it is, again, just weaving it throughout the day with the other activities that I'm doing. That way it doesn't become a standalone task that I have to try to find time to do, or I might find that there's some challenges in finding that time or justifying the time to use it. I just interweave it into the other things that I'm doing during the course of the day.
So do you find that, given what you just said, if you're using a particular device on social media, it's more often your phone than it is, say, a computer?
Yeah, different tasks, I guess, will be the different type of devices. So it's easy now with the phone, and again, when I'm out and about, that's a really great way to do it. But also, I don't ignore the fact that I can use the desktop applications when I'm doing work at my desk and doing literature searches or data analysis and things like that. It's easy enough to hop across to Twitter and other social media platforms to kind of share that information. And of course, too, I'm using those platforms for my work as well, because Twitter and the other academics that I follow, it's a really great resource to find out about not just mosquito related things, because there's lots of mosquito researchers or entomologists on social media, but also people that are providing resources on how you can be a better scientist. And so whether it's communication skills, literature search and review, kind of resources, they're really important for professional development as well. And I wouldn't find out about those if I wasn't on social media following the accounts that are promoting these types of resources.
How did you connect with a lot of those resources that are out there? So
yeah, look, it's a little bit like word of mouth, and so I like the description of social media as sort of you walk along the street and you can sort of see cafes or shops, and there's a group of people or like-minded individuals in those cafes that you want to go in, you want to engage with them. And for your core interests on social media, that's a really great way to connect to people. It's only a small subset of all the people that are on social media, but they're really beneficial to what you might be after.
Yeah.
But then you can take advantage of their networks as well. And so the accounts that they're retweeting or talking about, that's a good way to introduce yourself to these other fields. And so I'll often find myself being interested in people that might be tweeting or engaged in social media on wetland conservation, or policy and practice about public health, or science communication. And that can open up those new avenues, and feel free to sort of get distracted and go down those little sort of tributaries of the river of information and try to discover new people. And sometimes there's those people that then become your core people that you're engaged with.
I like the wetland river metaphor. That's sort of so on YouTube, so there's this video you sent through on YouTube, and we'll make that available afterwards to anyone who's watching. But on YouTube, you describe Twitter as the most effective platform for advocacy. Why is that?
Yeah, I found that Twitter's been the best because, for a couple of reasons. There's a lot of other academics and researchers very active on Twitter, more so than a lot of the other social media platforms. It's a very engaging platform, and so it gives you an opportunity to kind of connect other social media platforms, things like Instagram or your websites, but also it's a great connection to some of the online resources that, there's always going to be that tweet button on a website, but then there's also going to be the Twitter accounts of the journals or the government or non-government health organizations or the universities that are engaging with it. But the other thing too is, from my point of view, from sort of public health education, is that almost every journalist and broadcaster in the media in Australia has a Twitter account.
Right.
And now I get more journalists contacting me because they've found me through my social media presence, more so than to find the expert options that are available through the University of Sydney's website. And so that's an opportunity to engage in those broadcasters and journalists, not just in the initial phase of them trying to find out about new research or get people to comment on newsworthy stories, but also helping promote the stories once they're published or they've been broadcast. And I find that there can be a really strong interaction between the media outlets in that way that can help not just let someone find you to talk about that in the more mainstream media, but also promote it so that people can get access to that. And that's a really important thing to do as well.
And I think part of that that process of engaging with the media as well is a website like The Conversation. So you've written for The Conversation as well. How do you find that process? So how do you go about deciding that you're going to write something there and getting into that?
Yeah, The Conversation has been a real game changer for me because it gives a voice to researchers that can talk about their research or the research of colleagues or newsworthy events. And it gives you practice at being able to write in a style that is more easily digested, I guess, by the general public. So it's a real paradigm shift from our more scholarly journals and academic writing. But the real advantage of the Conversation is that you get to work with the editors that work at The Conversation. They can help you improve the way in which you write. But also the articles at The Conversation drive more activity. Yeah. So the fact that the articles there are readily available to be republished by things like the ABC or SBS or other media outlets, again, it further extends the reach of your science communication or your research. Yeah. It drives activity often from local radio stations and things like that as well. And so all of a sudden you can take that new bit of research that you've got. It might be kind of protected behind a paywall in an academic journal, but by sort of parlaying that into an article for The Conversation, it picks up more general media activity, and next thing you know, potentially hundreds of thousands, if not more than a million people might be finding out about your research. And that's, I guess, at the heart of it. As a researcher, we want our research to make a difference, and part of that difference is making the general public, but also policymakers being aware of that information as well.
Do you find that, so have you ever written an article for The Conversation and you find people have engaged with you on Twitter as a result of that article? So they've sort of thrown questions your way? And because I guess social media is not just about information out, it's actually a conversation that's sort of ongoing with people.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly been the case. And there's a lot of engagement both through social media, but as well as the Conversation website as a platform itself. Yeah. And I think for somebody in my position where I want to educate the community and make them aware of these issues, I need to understand the questions that they're asking.
Yeah.
And so there's a real benefit in terms of the information I can provide to local health authorities there, because we're very good at coming up with facts and lists of things that we think people want to know.
Right.
But often what we need to do is understand the questions people are asking, because whether it's through social media or whether it's by going and speaking at community events, taking on board the questions people are asking is really important. So a great example of that is that everybody wants to know what mosquito repellent is great to protect themselves from mosquito bites.
Yes, please tell me.
Yeah. But we're really, the health department is really great at providing a list of products you can use.
Right.
We're not great at showing people how to use it.
Okay, well.
Or how to interpret what they're reading on the commercial formulations that they see in the supermarket.
Sure.
In terms of how it's safe and effective to use. And so I think that two-way conversation that we can have with the public really can enhance the ability of us to kind of enhance our public health communications as well.
Nice. Now, one of the important considerations for researchers using social media is thinking about measuring the value of it, like the value of actually using this thing and however you measure value. And that might involve conventional analytics, like talking about followers and reach. And one thing that you said previously on that YouTube video that I mentioned, it's not about the number of followers, but giving some thought to the audience they're connected to. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. And I think when I talk to researchers that just starting out on Twitter,
yeah.
I think one of the really important barriers that sort of stops them becoming more engaged is that it takes time to build up the number of followers that they have. And it might be disconcerting to see that after a few months you might only have 100 followers or a couple of hundred followers, and you see people with thousands, tens of thousands, maybe millions of followers. Yeah. But it's not something that should discourage you, because it's not the number of people that are following you. Think about the network of people that you're engaged with.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're providing great, interesting content that's being retweeted by people with all of those large follower bases means that even though you might only have a couple of hundred people following you, your tweets might be reaching tens or hundreds of thousands of people. Yeah. And including in that might be journalists and broadcasters who want to come to you for comment and do stories, write articles, maybe other researchers who want to collaborate with you because all of a sudden they've discovered that somebody here at the University of Sydney is working on something that they've never known about before. And so connecting to that can increase your collaboration network as well as your audience.
So you're really describing social media as sort of super integrated into the work of a researcher now, rather than something you just have to be on, because there's that. You hear from time to time, I have to be on social media because everyone's on social media. But actually, it's an essential part of a researcher's life now? Or?
Yeah, I think it can be. Yeah. But I think it's really important to say that researchers shouldn't be pressured to feel as though they need to be on social media if they're not comfortable there.
Yeah, of course.
And there's unfortunately plenty of examples where people can get themselves into awkward situations, or they might feel uncomfortable about engaging in social media in many different respects. And so I think that's something that individual researchers have to take into account. I will always advocate that for me anyway, there's been a lot of advantages in being on social media, but for some people, that's not always going to be the case. They might not be comfortable with it, so they need to understand that.
Yeah.
But I think for those individuals, that doesn't mean they're excluded from the benefits of social media. So what I would encourage is find somebody in your field of research that is engaged in social media. Try to get them to give you a hand. Let them tweet or retweet about your information, or talk to the media and communications department of the University of Sydney. They can help you out, and maybe they can help be a broadcast for your new research. And so think about the network of social media as being a really great resource you can use. If you're not comfortable with it, find someone who is, and they can help you guide that through that process.
Nice. Are there any measures or metrics that you typically think about, sort of to go back to that question about measuring, particularly in terms of justifying engagement with social media? So it's not just followers, but is there other metrics you do think about? Or?
Yeah, so there's a range of metrics that you can get access to through the Twitter platform itself, and that will give you some indication about how widely those tweets that you're sending out are being read. You can find out how many people are kind of accessing those. So again, it's not just about the amount of followers that you have. It's not just about the amount of people who like or retweet your tweet, but you can look at the audience, and all that information is available in the back of house analytics sort of section of Twitter, and you can do that. But I think it's also really important to keep a note of that as a researcher, because in the same way that we're interested in those metrics associated with our scientific publications, we all think about impact factor. I think we should be thinking about that social media impact as well.
Yeah.
And so again, there's those that information you can get from the platform itself, but also going to things like the journal website where you've had your paper published. Things like altmetrics that take into account the amount of sharing of an article is really important as well. Have a look at those informations. Who's sharing the information and why are they sharing it? Is it that because they're interested in the topic, you've got a unique topic or a subject that people are kind of really engaged with? Have other people tweeted about it? And sometimes you can find out people who are tweeting about some of your research. You might not be directly associated with them, but you can reach out and engage with them and work out ways you can really boost that exposure. And so understanding what's happening in terms of the engagement of other social media users is a really important way that you can find those pathways of exploiting that yourself to get better exposure.
And I think one of the things that I've found really valuable with social media in terms of connecting with other people is it's used at conferences. So you have conference back channels, so hashtags that get used for a particular conference. And it's a good way to connect with, or at least I find it's a good way to connect with other researchers digitally before you actually meet them in person. Have you found a similar thing?
Yeah, look, it's definitely the case. And I think I explain to people that sometimes for these really large international meetings, you're spending a lot of time, a lot of money going to these meetings. If they have a lot of concurrent sessions, the last thing you want to do is be stranded at a poster session with nobody coming past your poster or giving a talk to a room that's hardly got anybody there.
Yeah.
And I think that by using social media, you can help promote yourself, your individual presentation in certain sessions, but the connectivity with other researchers by engaging with the official conference hashtag is almost immeasurable. And the amount of meetings now that I go to where social media is really an integral part of the meeting, and to the point where sometimes conference organizers will have a board displaying the social media feeds associated with the hashtag. And it's not just about, come and see my talk, but it's about, where's the best coffee around the conference venue, or where is everybody having an impromptu social meetup as well is really important. And so, again, it enhances that professional networking at conferences. And the other thing is that I know that I can jump on social media. There's a conference on mosquitoes happening in Europe. I can check that hashtag. I can see what people are talking about. I can see new resources and discover new people that I may not otherwise have known about. And so I see there being great advantages both at the meeting and also remotely accessing the conversations that are happening at the conference as well.
And it's a way of staying in touch with maybe a session that's happening at the same time as something that you're in. You're like, oh my God, I want to know what's happening in that room as well. And that's really cool. Now, you've included, I noticed in your email signature, you've included join the Twitter conversation. And you've also got your WordPress site there. How did you get started with your blog? And what are the ways that you find it valuable? Because I know there are a couple of, like, for example, the Thesis Whisperer and Patter blogs both talk about blogging as a way to practice writing. But how did you get into it?
Yeah, I think it's been a really great experience for me. And one of the reasons I started to do it is that I realized that a lot of the research that I was getting published in was behind paywalls. People couldn't readily access the papers, or they're in small entomological journals in some cases that almost at the time had no online presence. And so I realized that I was doing this work that people were interested in. It was important work. And one of the best ways to do that was actually to write blog articles about the papers. And a great example of that is one of some of my research projects is looking at insect repellents. I looked at the role of insect repellent wristbands to protect against mosquitoes. That don't work very well. Right. But in the scientific article I wrote, there's probably maybe only hundreds of people have seen that article.
Yeah, of course.
But by writing about it, all of a sudden, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people have got that key public health information about avoiding some of these sort of novelties in terms of mosquito repellents and choose something that's a bit more reliable. And I think, again, this is one of the really advantages of having a blog. You can get the key messages out about your paper, and not only are more people sort of seeing that, but then once you're starting to think about articles and write about them, you can think about how you can better communicate the science there, which in turn really helps if you're dealing with traditional media or even at conferences. If you're if you're presenting as a conference that has a very broad, non-specialist audience, having a clear idea about how you can communicate those key scientific messages has really great advantages. So you can see there's multiple advantages of just sort of maintaining, a research blog. Now, I've got to say, it takes time.
Yeah.
And I think many people kind of probably aren't honest about the time it takes to maintain a blog or something like
Sure.
that. So don't be under the misapprehension that it's an easy thing to do. It does take time. But if you don't want to have that time commitment, pursue avenues like the conversation or writing for other online sort of science websites and things like that. Get a bit of experience there, and then you can sort of certainly develop that into your own blog or website if that's something that you feel is going to be important.
Cool. So what we might do now is just have a look and see if there's any questions that have come through. Christina? None. Okay. Did you have any other sort of general tips about social media to let us know?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is, I guess, the things that you like to tweet about or be engaged with in social media. And so when I started, I was straight down the line, 100% just science sort of broadcasts. I just post links to papers. But what I found was that when I started to add a bit of personal touch to the content that I was sharing, people were a lot more engaged with me. So, I don't like sharing things about my kids and my family, but I do like sharing life as a scientist and the heartbreak and the successes that we have, the rejections we have, the failures that we have in the lab. All of those sort of things add a bit of insight into what it's like to be a scientist. And I think people find that a lot more engaging. So you can mix that up with the sort of scientific content to give a face to being a scientist. I also consider that what I'm doing is representing the University of Sydney and also my employer, New South Wales Health Pathology. So at the same time, I like to steer away from, more controversial, commentary on social issues or political issues. And I think there's a time and place for that. And sometimes I feel like I need to bite my tongue a little bit. I would like to kind of join some of those other conversations. But I'm mindful that, essentially, again, I'm representing my employer and my sort of academic affiliations, and so I'm mindful about our sort of the rules and regulations about publicly commenting on issues as well. And so I think that if you're wanting to be engaged in social media representing your research institution, have that conversation with the Media and Communications Department, or make yourself aware about the policies that might be in place about using social media or public comment on certain issues, because I think that's an important thing just to be mindful of, is that it's not just the people that are following you on social media, but a lot of your content is being widely available by people online. And so be well aware that many more people are reading your tweets than just simply the followers that you might have on a certain social media platform.
Yeah, I guess, and that's one of the things that we get asked about as well when people are doing controversial research or research that sort of strays into those areas where people might sort of give them blowback on Twitter. How do they sort of deal with that or avoid that? But,
and I think that's something to be very mindful of. And so, we know there's a lot of researchers that are in the field of vaccination advocacy or climate change research, which obviously can at times be a very contentious issue. And for the individual, you have to sort of be mindful of that. You're working in a space where there can be conflict and controversy, and working out how you can best handle that is something that you need to give some thought to. And perhaps that's something to take the time to have a conversation with. Again, the media or communications section of the university or whatever your associated institution would be.
And so what platforms are next on the horizon for you?
Look, I think Twitter is going to remain something that I'll be constantly engaged with. I'm finding more and more activity on Instagram. That suits me as well, because I'm in the swamps and sharing images of the wetlands. But I think clearly YouTube is something that people are engaged with a lot, and I've often heard the statistic that YouTube is almost the second most common search engine people go to when they're trying to find something out. And so again, thinking about how people find information out about public health, a presence on YouTube might be something that's really important. And again, podcasts too are something that people are incredibly engaged with. And sometimes they have extra technological barriers that you have to overcome and extra skills you have to learn. But I think that that's something that I'm going to have to think about as well. And for those of us, I think probably too, having dipping our toes in a number of different social media platforms is a way we get that experience. And there's lots of ways you can integrate the different social media feeds together as well, which you can you get sort of maximum benefit out of, which is well worth thinking about.
So we've had a couple of questions come in. The first from Milan. I'd like to get on Twitter, but a bit shy about writing comments. How do I get over that fear?
Yeah, I think it's that's sort of a normal kind of sort of question and something people are worried about. Look, I can understand the shyness, and I think that you can take a lead from other people and see what they're doing. So if you've got friends or colleagues or people that you like on social media, look at their feeds and see how they're commenting on things, and that can give you a bit of a hint at the way that's happening. But I guess that apart from being non-combative and supportive and curious, I think is the way to go about it. And I don't think I try to make the effort to respond to everybody that messages me or comments to me on social media, and I'm never going to. I always want to try to get back to people who are asking curious questions and things like that. And I think that's a way that you can kind of, maybe that's a way to overcome that shyness.
Geraldine asks, what are your thoughts on Facebook, and what suggestions do you have for... So two questions. What are your thoughts on Facebook? And the other is recruiting participants through social media, so research participants.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. So it's only relatively recently that I've had a more formal presence on Facebook, and you can now set up a Facebook page as a scientist, which is really useful. The biggest barrier that I've had from using Facebook is that I've been worried about the time it would take to regulate the sort of comments that come with posts associated with that, and the fact that they do tend to be they can sometimes be controversial and be difficult to maintain. And so a lot of my posts, I've sort of disabled comments and things like that to make it a bit more manageable. Having said that, I think there is so much productive conversation that happens within Facebook and shared. It's a space that I need to be engaged with. So I think you've got to try to understand how Facebook is working and how you might be able to reduce the workload of managing the comments and things that are coming into your Facebook feed. In terms of using social media as a recruitment tool, I haven't had as much experience with that directly, but I know that people are using it very effectively, particularly where you're trying to recruit people who have a particular subset of the community that you're trying to tap into. So, two examples of that, which I use social media for, is that if a journalist says they're doing a story on a particular mosquito-borne disease, social media is a good way for me to reach out and try to identify someone who's suffered that disease and put them in contact with a journalist. But also recently we did a large attitudinal study of a community in northern New South Wales, and by actively using social media, we were able to recruit over 700 people to be completing an online survey, and our original objective was really just a couple of hundred. And looking at the feedback from the participants, the majority of them were finding those links to the survey through sharing on Facebook in particular and other social media platforms. So again, depending on the audience you're trying to tap into, it can be a great resource to do that.
And Jonathan asks, how important is following others in your field and commenting on their posts in building your followership?
Yeah, I think it's really important to engage with your colleagues. And I think that one of the great benefits and advantages of Twitter in particular is that there's a bit of camaraderie amongst those in your field. And so I know we tend to be sometimes a bit competitive against colleagues in terms of the research and things that we're doing. But in social media, I think that there's some real benefit in kind of lifting up our colleagues as well and celebrating their successes and supporting them with their failures, I suppose, when we get manuscripts rejected. But I think engaging in those people in your field is really important, because I think that there's an overall benefit that if in your particular field of research there's a small group of scientists that are active on social media, I think that can boost the awareness of your field, which in turn can be of assistance when you're trying to gain funding from government or non-government organisations. So I don't think there can be enough engagement, and certainly if there's a mosquito researcher out there who hasn't contacted me, by all means, kind of make sure you reach out and tweet at me, because I'd like to kind of amplify your content as well. And so I'm always on the lookout for people in my field that may not have as many followers as me, and trying to make a concerted effort to try to share their content as well, so maybe they can get boosted up and the people following them can increase as well.
Awesome. And one last question, which is my question actually. Can you tell me, is it true that Mozzies find some people more attractive than other people? It's
certainly true, Pat. And
it is.
And it comes down to the...
I knew it!
maybe we could have brought some mosquitoes along to test this to see which of us was attracted more mosquito bites.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the carbon dioxide we breathe out,
Okay.
and it's the smell of our skin. And so, unfortunately, some of us smell a bit more attractive to mosquitoes than others.
Right.
You might smell a bit more like a bird. And so those mosquitoes that like to feed off birds are a bit more attracted to you.
Right.
But also people will react a little bit differently to the bites of mosquitoes. And so, this is a great conversation to have over the summer barbecue. And so if people are watching this and want to find out more, jump onto my feed, have a look at my articles for the conversation, and they'll give you a little bit more information about the science behind mosquito bites. And so they can be more informed and when they're having that conversation over the barbecue in the coming months.
Awesome. Thank you so much for participating today.
No, that's my pleasure. Always happy to kind of share my tips and tricks on social media, and hopefully that's been helpful for the people that are tuning in.
I hope so. And everybody, you can follow Cameron at Mozzie Bites on Twitter, and we'll be making this available on YouTube later. So thanks for tuning in.
Excellent. Thank you.
Cheers.